Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome. I've got a food word in my title, so you probably may guess that we're going to touch on eating animals. But there's so much more to it. I think when talking about the climate transition and solving those big challenges, we have to rethink our relationship with nature and with animals. And we're here with Christof to talk about how science, how our better understanding of animals can help us get there. Christof, you are a renowned expert in the study of consciousness. Could you please tell us about your work? What is consciousness? What are the differences in consciousness between people, humans, and animals?
So by consciousness, I mean experience, seeing, hearing, dreading, expecting, imagining, fearing, loving, hating, all those states, those are all states of consciousness. And the challenge with consciousness, the classical mind-body problem, is to understand how a physical system like my brain, the organ of consciousness, can give rise to these feelings. But we live in a world where we have feelings, and so the question is, how far do these feelings reach? So certainly babies, we believe, although they can't tell us directly, we believe they have feelings. How do we know that other people have feelings? You know, logically it's possible that none of you have feeling, that I'm the only conscious person. This is known as ontological solipsism. It's perfectly logical, compatible with everything I know. It's extremely unlikely. So typically we ask, how are you? And you'll tell me, oh, today I'm really depressed because of whatever, the election. But ultimately what I'm asking, what is your current conscious experience? Now, I can't do that with everyone. I can't do that with babies. I can't do that with behavioral unresponsive patients in the clinic. And of course, we can't do that with animals. So then we have to do what's called technically an abduction. We infer consciousness as the most likely explanation. So animals, particularly mammals, you know, we are mammal, like the cats and dogs and great apes and lions and all of those. And our brains are very similar. If I give you a little bit of a monkey brain or mouse brain or dog brain or human brain, no one except an expert armed with a microscope can say which is which. We have more of it than a mouse, but of course elephant and orcas have even more brain than we do. And also continuity of behavior. I mean, we know this, Darwin studied this in great detail. There's a great continuity of behavior across all, certainly across all mammals, and people are now raising the question in biology, is consciousness possibly coextensive with all animals or possibly even with all life, with every member of life?
I mean, you touched on a topic about the expanding understanding of different species, and I was just curious, maybe think, how many of you in the audience, raise your hands, have watched the documentary My Octopus Teacher? And of all of you, how has that helped you rethink? Have you rethought your understanding of octopus? Would you consider eating it again? Never. There are some hands, but not all of them. I'm just kind of, curious to know, I mean, how are we expanding that understanding that of species and kind of relating to them? Or, we used to, before it was, empathizing with dogs, with pets, but now, people are actually, experiencing that with the octopus or with different species. Where are we going with it?
Well, we're enlarging sort of the membership of sentient creatures, right? As we know more about the world and more about animals, we're returning to an ancient knowledge because, several thousand years ago, in more animist society, we all assumed that animals have spirits similar to us. And we are, in some sense, we're returning to that with the realization, the growing realization that even if you look at insects like bees, bees have something known as play. They can recognize individual beekeepers. They have a complex social structure. They have this dance, the waggle dance. I can tell them about the location and the angle relative to the sun of a food source. So they're very complicated features. And if you look at the hormones that they have, it's very similar to our hormones. So it's quite likely that if a bee has drunken a little bit of the golden nectar and is now returning to its sister in the hive, that it too feels some sense of accomplishment, just because of the great similarity between the behavior and the underlying hardware between us and them.
And so I wonder about the practical applications of all that knowledge. What can we use it for? How can it help guide our conservation strategies, our, how we think about nature, how we think about, the way we treat animals for different functions, by different industries? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we should maybe treat animals not just as means to an end, i.e. for instance, just for us to enjoy them or to eat them, but as an end, just like us, that they too have a life that's bookended between two eternities, just like you and I, that they too can enjoy the sounds and sights. They can also suffer. And many of these animals suffer atrociously, particularly in industrial meat keeping. And so I think that does have implications for how we behave, among others, how we eat, the way we think about what we should eat, that we should all be sort of more conscientious, more deliberate consumer of, if we do eat animal products, we should do that more deliberately and maybe less frequently. Because ultimately that meat that you see on your dish in a fancy restaurant, the supermarket, that is associated with a great deal of suffering, particularly if it comes from industrial source slaughterhouses, as most of the meat, certainly in this country, comes from.
So does it mean that basically, consumption of meat is growing? People are still eating. I think one of the ways to curb consumption is actually the price and inflation, and that's where we've seen some impact, but people continue to do it. What does it take to make people realize that, empathize with animals or understand the suffering, or where are we going? Or will it be the case that it will never change and we're just going to be shutting off some thinking?
Progress. No, there is progress. There's no reason to be pessimistic. There's progress. We have animal laws, for instance. 300 years ago, we didn't have them, right? We had the first animal laws in Victorian England, 1870 or something like that, right? We have societies for the protection of cruelty of animals. There's also, even in this country, right, in California now, it's illegal now to force feed geese, right, for foie gras. So things are changing. They could always change faster. There's this growing movement here in the US or elsewhere towards, alternative to meats, either lab-grown meat or, impossible meat, beyond meat, etc. There are lots of alternatives, and to the extent that we educate ourselves about these alternatives, and that they can not only, minimize suffering, but also have vastly lessen the environmental impact that are otherwise very expensive in terms of environmental cost of keeping beef. Mm-hmm. So there is change, there is progress. It may be slow, but things are happening. We shouldn't lose sight of the long-term goal to reduce the suffering of all conscious creatures and help the planet.
I'd like to open it up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions or would like to? Yes, we have some in the back. Do we have a microphone? So I can't see if anyone has a microphone to help with.
Just speak up.
Yeah.
Hey, if they're finding that plants have a lot of emotions and feelings and ability to communicate, then won't that put another kink in the works of deciding what we can eat without causing pain and suffering?
I think it's a very good question. So I think it's all a question of relative degree, right? We have laws that says thou shalt not kill, but then of course there's exception in war, in self-defense, and there's abortion, etc. So like any other moral decision, there are no absolute, and we should just try to sort of, at least animals that are very close to us, that mean close evolutionary, that also have high capacity to be conscious, that can experience in a differentiated way, similar to us. Most mammals are of that ilk. We should maybe avoid those or minimize those, and of course we have to eat something, and eat animals that have lower or lesser degree of consciousness. There is a ladder you can measure. I mean, there's some theories now that start to measuring the extent of consciousness. the quantity of consciousness in any one system. And so you can certainly sort of, there are gradations, and that has to apply to plants as well. Right now, the idea of plant consciousness is still considered by most people very far out, but it's not impossible. And if you look at the complexity of even plant cells, there's nothing in our technological environment right now that gets even closer to the complexity of a single plant cell. So it may well be possible.
Maybe let's start with the back. You guys were first.
So I saw recently that there's a program I can run on my computer that reconstructs a biological organism. It looks like a worm, cell by cell. So each cell, it has programmed the function of the cell and the purpose of the cell. So with the collective purpose of all of the cells contributing together as in a biological organism, does that computer program then qualify as being conscious?
It's a very good question, which is now, of course, being asked increasingly in terms of ChatGPT, right? So the program you're referring to models the worm C. elegans. It's a nematode. It has 302 neurons and 1,018 cells. Yes, you can certainly simulate that, and you can get this creature in a simulated environment to do all sorts of things that are worm-like. But that's different from actually instantiating the causal power of that organism. Where it matters is, think about it. You can simulate a rainstorm, it doesn't get wet inside your computer. You can write down the differential equation for Einstein's theory of general relativity, right? You can write them down, you can simulate them, you can simulate the mass at the center of our galaxy, that's 3 million solar masses. That's so powerful, it bends space-time around it and turns into a black hole. But funny enough, when you run that simulation, you don't have to be afraid that you're going to be sucked into that computer simulation, because it's just a simulation. Same thing with consciousness. Consciousness is actually, I think, the way I think about it, it's causal power. And you can simulate that, but you can only simulate the behavior associated with that. You will never get a conscious creature. So this worm will not be conscious, and ChatGPT or GPT 5.0 maybe in a couple of years from now will probably be more intelligent than any of us, will certainly have better memory, but it will not feel like anything. It'll feel as much as your trash compactor.
So then what is missing? What's the difference between the program and
the same difference as between mass, simulating mass, and actually the ability of mass to bend space-time around it, causal power. Mass turns out has causal power to bend space-time, and space-time conforms to that, right? That's Einstein. Same thing with consciousness. Consciousness is not just some airy-fairy thing that you can compute. It's actually causal power of a system like the brain, the most complex piece of organized matter in the known universe, to exercise causal power upon itself. And you have to build that into the system. So possibly with quantum computers, or possibly with what's known as neuromorphic computers, computers that are built in close image of a brain, they might be conscious, but certainly not digital computers as we build them, for Neumann architecture as they run in the cloud right now.
Thank you. I'm going to take one from here because it's, and I'm conscious we've got so much to go through. Where are we with regards to communicating meaningfully with other animals, and how do you think that may play a role in helping us work towards addressing climate change?
Okay, the first question is, how many of you sort of lived your life with a cat or a dog? Do you think you can communicate in a meaningful way with your cat and dog? Yes? Okay, so I think people, you can certainly do that. You can do that with all sorts of creatures, including with a cephalopod, like the octopus, that's evolutionary very, very distant related, much more distant related than we are related to cats and dogs. So it's certainly possible. I don't know what that means for climate change. Very honest.
And several ancient belief systems have the idea of all life have feelings and consciousness. Why does this come as a new idea?
Well, partly it comes within the Western tradition, which is of course shaped by Christianity, where sort of we are exceptional, right? you know, René Descartes, very famous, you know, dualist, sort of father of modern mind-body philosophy, right? Says only we, you know, if my carriage hits a dog, the dog will squeal, but only we have cognitive stuff, you know, thinking stuff, the soul, and the animals, so the animals just reflex, right? So for the longest, we believe that humans are exceptional. We are exceptional, we are different from anything else in the universe, which is of course baloney. We evolved just like all these other creatures evolved. So this goes back to a much more ancient belief that we're all part of the universe, that we're all in soul, that we all have sentient to a lesser or larger degree. So clearly my dog doesn't know about the weekend or about Bloomberg or about relativity, right? But my dog knows a lot about food and about what he likes, what he dislikes, and he or she can smell and, you know, has an entire sensorium, entire Umwelt that's different from us, but it's also highly, highly sophisticated. And that's true for dogs just as well for any other creature. And it's and even within Western tradition, there's a thing known as biopsychism. So you may have heard panpsychism, which is this very old idea, both in the West as well as in Eastern tradition, that everything is in soul, including this little guy. Biopsychism is the idea that consciousness is specifically related to anything in the tree of life, which we don't know whether it's true, but it's a very interesting idea that people are beginning to explore now.
Any gentleman in orange?
So on the topic of, we talked about food consumption. I want to talk about food waste, right? So humans have a lot of food waste, right? Something 15 to 20% of our intended consumption goes to waste. What other conscientious animals have a similar waste in their food consumption?
Cats.
Are you a dog person?
I'm a dog person. But it is true that I know many cat people, they're okay. And from them, you know, the cats kill birds. And most of the time, they just kill the birds and don't eat it. So you can think of that, that's wasteful, right? So again, we're not that different, right? We are a species, like many other species, we are more powerful in certain ways, no question about it. And so we have this food waste, but it's not that other species are innocent of that. They also have it, particularly if we let them develop that.
Please.
I am concerned, and I don't know if you've thought about this, that this concept of consciousness is particular to mammals. And there's a movement towards eating fish. And our oceans are being depleted by commercial fishing. So on the one hand, we don't eat meat or eat cow, but fish has a different set of consciousness, and we're depleting the oceans at a rate that is horrendous for the environment as well. So first, what level of consciousness do fish have? And if they don't, does that warranty that we eat them indiscriminately?
Just to repeat, do fish have consciousness? What level?
Again, it depends on the complexity and the size of the brain, to first order. So, creatures like fish, they do have brains. I think, given all the evidence, they likely also experience the world in a different way, right? They swim through water, and their olfactory system is somewhat different. But I have little doubt that a fish will too, and certainly they have pain. They have certainly pain receptors that respond in very similar ways to your and my pain receptors. So I think consciousness is very widespread, including, as we mentioned early on, in octopus and squid and other animals. And if we choose to eat them, fine, but then we should be conscious of that, and we should do it deliberately, and we should try to put some limits on it, including in fish. Maybe not eat fish every day. Partly, of course, here we have the problem. We have orcas that, the southern orcas here, there are only 76 members left of this glorious species because we eat too much salmon. We love Chinook salmon, and so maybe we ought to eat less of it.
The time has flown by and we don't have much time, but I just was curious to know, just to ask you about your personal journey. I think you're a vegetarian. I mean, how did that come about? Science, through science?
Well, yes and no. So, yeah, I grew up in a meat-loving family. The taste of meat is, of course, very deeply ingrained in our culture. I literally got it, with not quite with my mother's milk, but very early on. But then as a scientist, I realized, that these other creatures are conscious too. Maybe I shouldn't be eating them. But again, it was too powerful. But then I had this transformative experience where my dog was dying that night, Nosy, a black German Shepherd, was dying in my arms, and I was distraught. I was crying, and I was distraught, and I thought to myself, how can I be so distraught about the death of this creature? But at the same time, I still love eating similar creatures like lamb and pork. And then that night, I decided I'd honor my dog. This is now 16 years ago. I honor my dog by never touching another piece of flesh, which I haven't done. So it does take sometimes this emotional impetus to turn this insight that, I probably shouldn't be doing this anymore, but I still do it because I find it very difficult to not do. Then to have some emotional trigger like that to help you over that hurdle and then say, okay, I'm done now with meat.
Just a final word of advice or anything that you want to say?
Yeah, just be conscientious. I mean, I'm not going to judge anyone. We're all free to do what we want, but then, and it doesn't have to be absolute. People always say, well, do I have to stop eating anything from animal? Do I have to turn into an extreme vegan? No, it's all a question of relative, and any difference will make a difference. So be conscientious in your consumption, in your choices.
Thank you very much, Christof. Thank you.